I never thought my peaceful lakefront property in northern Minnesota would become the center of a legal nightmare. But when I woke up one January morning to see construction equipment on my frozen lake, I knew the Pinewood Heights HOA had finally crossed a line I couldn't ignore. My name is Frank Ashford, and I had been living on the shores of Lake Serenity for 15 years. I purchased my property before the development went up, which meant I wasn't technically part of the HOA, though they had been trying to force me to join since the first family moved into those cookie-cutter houses 3 years ago. My 2-acre property sat on prime lakefront real estate, and the lake itself was entirely on my land. Every single inch of it. I had the survey maps, the deed, and the property records to prove it. The HOA president, Patricia Hendricks, had been a thorn in my side since day one. She was exactly what you would picture. A middle-aged woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob that she probably called sassy, designer athleisure, where that cost more than my truck payment, and an entitlement complex the size of Minnesota itself. Patricia had knocked on my door at least once a month for the past 3 years, each time with a new complaint or demand. First, it was my mailbox. Too rustic, she said. Didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I reminded her I wasn't in her neighborhood. Then it was my dock, which she claimed was an eyesore. I told her not to look at it. Then she wanted me to paint my house a different color, trim my trees, remove my old truck from the driveway, and contribute to the community Christmas light display. Each time, I politely but firmly told her no. But this morning was different. This morning, Patricia hadn't just crossed a boundary. She had demolished it, driven over it with heavy machinery, and was apparently planning to build a resort on top of it. I grabbed my coat and boots, stomping through the snow down to the lake's edge. The ice was thick this time of year, at least 18 inches, enough to support the weight of the excavator, dump truck, and construction crew that were currently setting up what looked like the foundation for a large building right in the middle of my frozen lake. I marched across the ice, my boots crunching on the snow-covered surface. A young guy in a hard hat saw me approaching and held up his hand. "Sir, this is a construction zone. You need to stay back." "This is my property," I said, pointing at the ice beneath our feet. "All of it." "Who authorized this?" The worker looked confused. "The HOA hired us. We have permits and everything. You need to talk to them." "Oh, I will," I said. "But I'm telling you right now, you're building on private property without permission. That's trespassing." A woman's voice cut through the cold air. "Frank, there you are." Patricia was making her way across the ice, carefully navigating in her expensive boots that were definitely not meant for winter in Minnesota. Behind her trailed 2 other women I recognized from the neighborhood, Sharon Klein and Deborah Waters, her ever-present entourage. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level. "What is this?" She smiled brightly, like she was about to tell me I had won a prize. "This is the Pinewood Heights Community Resort and Recreation Center. Isn't it exciting? We broke ground today. Well, broke ice, I suppose." She laughed at her own joke. Sharon and Deborah joined in dutifully. "You're building on my lake." "Oh, Frank, don't be silly. This lake serves the community. We've taken a vote, and the HOA has decided that since our development surrounds the lake, we have a right to use it for community purposes. We're building a beautiful resort with a warming house, rental facilities for ice fishing, a restaurant, and in the summer, it will transition to a boating and swimming center. It's going to increase everyone's property values." I stared at her. "Patricia, I own this lake. The entire lake. It's on my property. You can't just vote to take someone's property." She waved her hand dismissively. "Our lawyer said we could. Something about community easements and public access to water. Plus, you're being unreasonable. You have all this space and you're not even using it properly." The community needs this. Your lawyer is wrong and you need to stop construction immediately. Patricia's smile faded. Frank, we've already invested $50,000 in this project. We have investors, commitments from local businesses, and a grand opening scheduled for February 14th. Valentine's Day, it's going to be so romantic. We're not stopping now. Then you're going to have a major problem. Is that a threat? Sharon piped up, her nasal voice grating on my nerves. It's a fact. This is my property and you're trespassing. I'm asking you nicely one time to stop this construction and remove your equipment. Patricia crossed her arms. And I'm telling you, Frank, that the HOA has rights here. We've consulted with legal counsel and we're proceeding. If you have a problem with it, you can take it up with our lawyers. She handed me a business card. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a resort to build. They walked away, leaving me standing on my own frozen lake, watching strangers build a structure without my permission. I looked down at the business card. Morrison and Associates, Real Estate Law. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. The equipment, the workers, the partial foundation they had already poured in a heated section. I documented all of it. Then I went back to my house and made a call to my own lawyer, Richard Chen. Richard and I had gone to high school together here in Brainerd, and he had handled my property purchase and various other legal matters over the years. He was good, thorough, and he didn't suffer fools. Frank, how are you? Richard answered on the second ring. I've been better. I need your help. The HOA is building a resort on my lake. There was a pause. Your lake, the one that's entirely on your property, that's the one. They can't do that. I know that. You know that. But they've got construction crews out there right now, and they're claiming some nonsense about community easements and public water access. Richard sighed. Email me everything. Pictures, documents, any communication you've had with them. I'll look into this Morrison firm they've hired. This is insane, Frank. Even for an HOA, this is next-level insane. What should I do right now? Document everything, but don't physically interfere with the construction. We don't want you catching an assault charge or anything like that. Let them dig their own hole deeper. I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning. I spent the rest of the day watching from my window as the construction continued. They worked fast. I would give them that. By nightfall, they had erected the frame for what looked like a substantial building, maybe 3,000 square feet. They had lights set up, and it appeared they were planning to work through the night. The next morning, Richard called me at 7. I've got good news and bad news. Good news is I'm filing the injunction in an hour. Bad news is the judge can't see us until Friday. That's 3 days from now. They're going to have the whole thing built by then. I know, but that might work in our favor. The more they invest in this illegal structure, the bigger the consequences when we prove they're in the wrong. You're sure we'll win, Frank. You have a deed that clearly shows the lake is on your property. You have survey maps. You have tax records showing you pay taxes on that land, including the lake. They have nothing except entitlement and apparently terrible legal advice. We'll win. The question is how much damage they do before we shut them down. Over the next 3 days, I watched as the resort took shape. It was actually impressive, in a maddening sort of way. The main building had floor-to-ceiling windows facing all directions, a stone facade that probably cost a fortune, and a large deck that wrapped around the entire structure. They put up signs advertising the grand opening. Pinewood Heights Resort, opening Valentine's Day, ice fishing rentals, fine dining, private event space. Patricia stopped by my house on Thursday evening. I saw her coming and met her at the door before she could ring the bell. Frank, I wanted to personally invite you to the grand opening tomorrow, she said, handing me a fancy embossed invitation. I know we've had our differences, but this resort is really for everyone. I think when you see how beautiful it is, you'll understand what we're trying to do here. I'll be there, I said. She brightened. Really? Oh, Frank, I'm so glad. You know, maybe this can be a fresh start for us. The HOA would still love to have you as a member. I'll definitely be there, I repeated. She practically skipped back to her car. I looked down at the invitation. Grand opening celebration, February 14th, 5 p.m., champagne reception, ribbon cutting ceremony, tours of the facility. Black tie optional. They were really going all out. Friday morning, Richard and I sat in Judge Martha Callahan's chambers at the Crow Wing County Courthouse. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Derek Morrison who couldn't have been more than 35 and seemed way too confident. Your Honor, Richard began, this is a straightforward case of trespassing and illegal construction. My client, Frank Ashford, owns the property in question, including the entirety of Lake Serenity. The HOA has constructed a commercial building on his property without permission, without easement, and without any legal right to do so. Judge Callahan looked at the documents Richard had submitted. Mr. Morrison, how does your client justify this construction? Morrison leaned back in his chair. Your Honor, while Mr. Ashford may technically own the land beneath the lake, Minnesota law recognizes certain public rights to water access. Additionally, the community development of Pinewood Heights has surrounded this body of water, and we believe there's a strong case for community easement by necessity. Easement by necessity, Richard said incredulously. That applies when there's no other access to a property. These people all have street access to their homes. They don't need this lake. But they need community recreation space, Morrison countered. It's a quality of life issue. Judge Callahan held up her hand. Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed the property records. The lake is clearly delineated as part of Mr. Ashford's property. He pays taxes on it. There's no recorded easement. Your client has built a commercial structure on someone else's land. How did you possibly advise them that this was legal? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. We believed we had grounds to establish a new easement through the courts, Your Honor. The construction was perhaps premature, but the HOA felt strongly about the project timeline. Premature? I couldn't help myself. You built an entire resort without permission. Mr. Ashford, the judge said, not unkindly, let the lawyers handle this. She turned back to Morrison. I'm issuing an immediate cease and desist order. All construction stops as of right now. We'll schedule a full hearing for next month to determine next steps, but in the meantime, nothing else gets built on that lake. Patricia, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. But Your Honor, we have a grand opening tonight. We've invited over 200 people. We have caterers, musicians, a photographer from the local newspaper. We can't cancel now. Judge Callahan looked at her with barely concealed exasperation. Mrs. Hendricks, you built a commercial facility on someone else's property. You're lucky I'm not ordering it demolished immediately. The cease and desist means no further construction. What you do tonight is between you and Mr. Ashford, but I suggest you start thinking about how you're going to make this right. Patricia turned to me, her eyes pleading. Frank, please, just let us have the opening. We can sort everything else out later. We've spent almost $200,000 on this. People are expecting it. $200,000. They had increased their investment fourfold in less than a week. I kept my face neutral. We'll see. After the hearing, Richard pulled me aside in the courthouse hallway. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I want them to have their grand opening. Let them celebrate. Let them give interviews to the newspaper about their wonderful new community resort. Let them toast their success." Richard grinned. And then we show up with the court order and shut it down in front of everyone. "Frank, I love it, but be careful. Don't do anything that could hurt our case." "I won't. I'm just going to attend a party I was personally invited to." I went home and watched as the final preparations unfolded on my lake. They brought in trucks full of furniture, strung lights around the deck, and set up a sound system. A catering van arrived at 3 o'clock, followed by a bartender's truck. It was a full production. I took a shower, put on my best suit. It was a black wool number I had bought for my brother's wedding 5 years ago and hadn't worn since. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 52 years old, with gray creeping into my brown hair and lines around my eyes from years of outdoor work. I looked tired, but tonight I felt energized. At 4:45 I walked down to the lake. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in purples and oranges. The resort was lit up like a Christmas tree, golden light spilling from the windows onto the snow. It looked magical, I had to admit. If it wasn't an illegal building on my property, I might have even appreciated it. People were arriving, parking along the street and walking carefully across the ice. I recognized most of them as Pinewood Heights residents, though there were some faces I didn't know. Local business owners, probably, or potential investors Patricia had courted. Patricia stood at the entrance in a red dress that probably cost more than my truck, greeting people as they arrived. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Frank, you came. And in a suit. You look wonderful." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She ushered me inside and I had to hand it to them. They had done a beautiful job. The interior was all exposed wood beams and stone, with a massive fireplace as the centerpiece. One side was set up as a restaurant with about 20 tables, all set with white linens and fresh flowers. The other side was a rec area with rentals, ice fishing equipment, sleds, skates. There was a full bar along the back wall, and sliding glass doors led to the deck where heat lamps kept the worst of the cold at bay. "What do you think?" Patricia appeared at my elbow, handing me a glass of champagne. "It's impressive," I said honestly. "You've put a lot of work into this." "We really have. Frank, I hope you can see past our differences. This resort is going to be such an asset to the community. And you're part of this community whether you want to admit it or not." I sipped my champagne and didn't answer. By 5:30, the place was packed. Patricia had gathered everyone outside on the deck for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She stood with those comically large scissors, flanked by Sharon and Deborah, with the photographer from the Brainerd Dispatch snapping photos. "Thank you all for coming to this momentous occasion." Patricia's voice rang out across the lake. "When we first envisioned Pinewood Heights, we dreamed of creating not just a neighborhood, but a true community. A place where families could create memories, where neighbors become friends, where we all look out for each other. This resort represents the culmination of that dream, a space for all of us to gather, to celebrate, to enjoy the natural beauty that surrounds us." People clapped. Someone whistled. I want to especially thank our incredible HOA board for their vision and dedication. Sharon Klein, our treasurer, who managed this complex budget. Deborah Waters, our secretary, who handled all the permits and paperwork. And our wonderful legal counsel, Morrison and Associates, who navigated all the complicated property issues. I saw Morrison in the crowd, holding a beer and looking pleased with himself. "And of course," Patricia continued, "I want to acknowledge Frank Ashford, our neighbor, who I hope will come to see this resort as a wonderful addition to our shared community." She looked right at me and I raised my glass to her. Without further ado, let's officially open the Pinewood Heights Resort. She cut the ribbon and everyone cheered. Champagne flowed. A band started playing inside. People explored the facility, exclaiming over the rental equipment, admiring the restaurant space, taking selfies by the fireplace. I stayed for about an hour, watching Patricia hold court, listening to her tell people about the future plans for the resort. They were going to offer ice fishing tournaments, she said, host wedding receptions. There was talk of bringing in a celebrity chef to run the restaurant. The HOA had already pre-sold season passes to 50 families. At 6:30, I saw Richard arrive. He wasn't in a suit, just jeans and a heavy coat. He spotted me and made his way over. "Is it time?" he asked quietly. "Almost. Let's wait for the newspaper interview. I want this documented." At 7 o'clock, Patricia sat down with the reporter from the Dispatch, a young woman named Emily something. I positioned myself where I could hear the interview. "This resort represents everything the HOA stands for," Patricia was saying. "Community, family values, taking initiative to improve our neighborhood. We didn't just sit around waiting for someone else to create the space we wanted. We made it happen ourselves." "There's been some controversy about the location," Emily said, checking her notes. "Something about property boundaries," Patricia waved it off. "A minor misunderstanding with a neighbor. Nothing that couldn't be worked out. The important thing is what we've created here. A true community gathering space that will serve Pinewood Heights for generations." "And the investment?" "I heard this cost nearly $250,000. $230,000 to be exact," Patricia said proudly. "Every penny from HOA funds and private investments from community members. We're completely self-financed. That's quite a commitment. We believe in this community. We believe in this vision." Emily smiled and closed her notebook. "Well, congratulations. It really is beautiful." I waited until Emily had taken a few more photos and was packing up her gear. Then I nodded to Richard. He made a phone call, and 2 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy walked across the ice toward the resort. The music was still playing when Deputy James Martinez entered the building. I had called ahead and explained the situation to Sheriff's Department, and they had agreed to have someone present when we served the cease and desist order. Martinez was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked uncomfortable with what he was about to do. "Excuse me," he called out. The music stopped. Everyone turned. "I'm looking for Patricia Hendricks." Patricia came forward, confused. "That's me." "Is something wrong, officer?" "Madam, I need to inform you that a cease and desist order has been issued by Judge Callahan regarding this structure. As of right now, this building is in violation of property laws. I need to ask everyone to evacuate the premises." The room went silent. You could hear the wind outside rattling the windows. "What?" Patricia's face went white. "What are you talking about?" Richard stepped forward, pulling documents from his coat. "Mrs. Hendricks, as was established in court this morning, this building has been constructed on private property without permission. This is Frank Ashford's land, including the lake. You have no right to be here, and this structure is illegal. But the judge said we could have the opening." Patricia's voice was shrill. "No," Richard corrected. "The judge said the cease and desist prevented further construction. She also said what happened tonight was between you and Mr. Ashford. Mr. Ashford has decided to enforce his property rights." All eyes turned to me. I stepped forward, making sure my voice carried to everyone in the room. "For 3 years, the Pinewood Heights HOA has harassed me. They've tried to force me to join their organization, to comply with their rules, to pay their fees. I've told them repeatedly that I'm not part of their development and that my property, including this lake, is private. They ignored me. They decided that what they wanted was more important than property rights or the law. So they built this resort without permission, without easement, without any legal authority whatsoever. "Frank, please," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "Can't we talk about this?" "We could have talked about it before you spent $230,000 building on my lake. We could have talked about it when you first had this idea. But you didn't want to talk. You wanted to take. Well, Patricia, you can't take what isn't yours." Sharon pushed forward. "This is ridiculous. The community needs this space. You're just one person. What gives you the right to ruin this for everyone?" "Property ownership," Richard said flatly. "That's what gives him the right." Morrison, the lawyer, finally spoke up. "Look, everyone calm down. We can work this out. Frank, the HOA is willing to negotiate an easement. We can pay you for the rights to use this space." "You should have done that before you built," I said. "You gave me terrible legal advice and now your clients are facing significant consequences." "We can sue you," Patricia said suddenly. "We can sue you for damages, for interference with business, for harassment." Richard actually laughed. "Please do. Please give us that discovery process. I would love to put your entire board on the stand and ask them under oath how they decided it was legal to build a commercial structure on someone else's property. By all means, sue us." Deputy Martinez cleared his throat. "Folks, I need everyone to leave the building. Now. This is private property and you're trespassing." People started moving toward the door, grabbing coats and bags. They were murmuring to each other, shooting angry looks my way. A few people glared openly at Patricia, clearly investors who were realizing their money had been wasted. "This isn't over," Patricia hissed at me as she grabbed her coat. "We'll fight this." "You already fought it," I said. "You lost." The evacuation took about 20 minutes. People trudged across the ice in their fancy clothes back to their cars. The catering staff loaded up their equipment, clearly annoyed at the disruption. The band packed up their instruments. Finally, it was just me, Richard, Deputy Martinez, and Patricia standing in the empty resort. The lights were still on, the fireplace still crackling. The champagne glasses sat abandoned on tables, some still half full. "What happens now?" Patricia asked quietly. All the fight had gone out of her. "Now," Richard said. "Now we go to the full hearing next month. The judge will determine what happens to this building. Most likely, she'll order it demolished and removed from Mr. Ashford's property at your expense. The HOA will be liable for all costs associated with that removal. You may also face fines for illegal construction. And anyone who invested personal money in this project will probably sue the HOA to recover their losses." "We'll be bankrupted," Patricia whispered. "You should have thought of that before," I said. I didn't feel good about it exactly, but I didn't feel bad either. "Come on, Richard. Let's go home." We walked out of the resort, across the frozen lake, leaving Patricia standing alone in the building she had been so proud of an hour ago. Deputy Martinez stayed to make sure she locked up and left. Back at my house, Richard and I sat at my kitchen table with coffee. "They're going to come after you hard," Richard said. "Expect retaliation. HOA complaints, harassment, maybe even vandalism. Document everything." "I know. But what else was I supposed to do? Let them steal my property?" "No, you did the right thing. It's just going to be unpleasant for a while." He was right about that. Over the next week, I received 17 certified letters from the HOA about various violations. My mailbox was wrong. My fence was too tall. My trees were overhanging the public road. My truck was parked illegally in my own driveway. Each letter threatened fines and legal action. I forwarded them all to Richard, who sent back a single response to the HOA. "Mr. Ashford is not a member of your association and is not subject to your rules. Any further harassment will result in legal action." The letters stopped, but the damage was done to Patricia and the HOA board. The story hit the Brainerd Dispatch the next day. Local HOA forced to shut down resort built on private property. Emily, the reporter, had done her homework. She had obtained the court records, interviewed Judge Callahan, and gotten statements from angry investors. The article was damning. It detailed how the HOA had spent association funds without proper approval, how Morrison had given them faulty legal advice, and how Patricia had pushed forward with construction, despite knowing there were property disputes. Several residents told Emily they had never approved the resort expenditure and were now facing special assessments to cover the HOA's legal costs. Morrison and Associates put out a statement saying they stood by their legal analysis and blamed the judge for failing to recognize community easement rights. That statement got them a sharp rebuke from Judge Callahan in the next hearing, where she called their legal reasoning baffling and possibly negligent. The full hearing took place on March 15th, 6 weeks after the disastrous grand opening. The courtroom was packed with Pinewood Heights residents, split into clear factions, those who blamed Patricia for the mess, and those who still thought I was the villain for not sharing my lake. Judge Callahan didn't waste time. "I've reviewed all the filings and evidence. This is one of the most clear-cut property disputes I've seen in my 20 years on the bench. Mr. Ashford owns the lake. The HOA built on his property without permission. The structure must be removed." Patricia started crying. Sharon put an arm around her. "The HOA will be responsible for all costs associated with removing the structure and restoring the lake to its original condition. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Ashford's legal fees, which I see amount to $12,000 so far. Mr. Ashford, do you wish to pursue additional damages? Richard and I had discussed this." "Your Honor, Mr. Ashford requests damages for trespass and unauthorized use of his property during the construction period and the grand opening event. We're requesting $50,000 in damages." "50,000, Morrison jumped up. "That's excessive, Your Honor." "Is it?" Judge Callahan looked at him coolly. "They built a $200,000 structure on his lake and hosted a commercial event. $50,000 in damages seems quite reasonable. I'm granting the request." "The HOA will pay Mr. Ashford $50,000 within 60 days. "Your Honor, the HOA doesn't have that kind of money," Morrison said. "Then they'll need to assess their members or sell assets. That's not Mr. Ashford's problem." This court also finds that Morrison and Associates provided inadequate legal counsel in this matter. "Mrs. Hendricks, I strongly suggest you seek compensation from your attorneys for their role in this debacle." Morrison's face went red, but he said nothing. "The structure will be removed by May 1st. The HOA will hire appropriate contractors and obtain all necessary permits for the demolition and removal. Mr. Ashford will be provided with documentation of the removal and restoration work. Are there any questions?" No one spoke. "Then we're adjourned." The removal of the resort took 3 weeks. A demolition crew carefully dismantled the building, hauling away the materials piece by piece across the still frozen lake. By mid-April, when the ice was starting to get dangerous, they had removed everything except the foundation, which had to wait until the ice melted. I watched from my window as my lake slowly returned to normal. Once the ice was gone, a barge came in to remove the concrete foundation, and a restoration crew repaired the lake bed where the construction had disturbed it. By the end of May, you could barely tell anything had been there at all. The money arrived in my account on May 30th, 2 days before the deadline. $50,000 in damages, plus the $12,000 in legal fees. $62,000 total. Richard called me that afternoon. Got some interesting news. Patricia Hendricks has resigned as HOA president. The board voted her out. They're also suing Morrison and Associates for legal malpractice. Good for them. There's more. Several residents have filed a class action suit against the HOA board for misuse of funds. Apparently, Patricia authorized the resort construction without a proper vote, and she used emergency funds that were supposed to be for road repairs and snow removal. So it gets worse for her. Much worse. The Minnesota Attorney General's office is also looking into it. Using HOA funds for unauthorized construction might constitute fraud or embezzlement. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but close. She really destroyed her life over this. She destroyed her life by thinking she could take your property without consequences. That's on her, Frank. He was right, of course, but it was still hard to watch. Over the summer, I saw Patricia around town occasionally. She looked smaller somehow, older. She didn't acknowledge me when our paths crossed at the grocery store or the hardware store. The criminal investigation wrapped up in July. The Attorney General decided not to press charges, determining that while Patricia had acted improperly, there wasn't sufficient evidence of intentional fraud. She had genuinely believed, thanks to Morrison's advice, that the HOA had the right to build on the lake. It was a civil matter, not criminal, but the civil matters were punishment enough. The class action suit was settled in August. Patricia, Sharon, and Deborah were personally liable for $70,000 in damages to the HOA members. Morrison and Associates settled their malpractice suit for an undisclosed amount, but I heard through the grapevine it was substantial enough that Derek Morrison left the firm. Patricia's house went up for sale in September. I saw the sign go up one morning during my regular walk. By October, it was sold, and I watched from my porch as the moving truck loaded up her belongings. She never came over to say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. The new HOA president, a reasonable guy named Tom Fitzgerald who lived 3 houses down from Patricia's old place, stopped by in November. "Mr. Ashford, I'm Tom. I wanted to introduce myself and apologize on behalf of the HOA for everything that happened." I invited him in for coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place Richard and I had planned our legal strategy a year ago. "I want you to know that the board has completely restructured how we operate," Tom said. "We've got new bylaws, better financial oversight, and we've made it crystal clear that we have no jurisdiction over non-member properties. What Patricia did was inexcusable." "I appreciate you saying that. I also wanted to ask if you'd be interested in becoming a member. Voluntarily, of course. No pressure. We've reduced the fees significantly now that we're not funding crazy construction projects." He smiled weakly at his own joke. "I'll think about it," I said, surprising myself. A year ago, I would have said no immediately. But Tom seemed genuine, and I realized that most of the Pinewood Heights residents were probably decent people who had been poorly represented by Patricia's regime. That's all I can ask. And Frank, thank you for not pushing for criminal charges. I know you could have made this much worse for everyone involved. After he left, I walked down to the lake. It was starting to freeze again, that first thin layer of ice forming along the edges. In a few months, it would be solid enough to walk on again, maybe even drive on. But there would be no resort, no grand opening, no champagne toasts on someone else's property, just my lake, peaceful and private, the way it had always been. I did eventually join the HOA about 6 months later. Tom and his board were doing a good job, and I figured it was easier to have a voice in the community decisions than to remain completely separate. Plus, they were finally doing something about the roads, which benefited everyone. The story became a bit of a legend in Brainerd. The local HOA that built a resort on someone's lake and lost everything. Other HOAs in the area apparently used it as a cautionary tale in their board training. "Don't pull a Pinewood Heights," they would say. I used some of the settlement money to build a new dock, a really nice one with a covered boathouse. Purely to spite the ghost of Patricia's aesthetic complaints, I made it as rustic as possible. Reclaimed wood, a tin roof, the works. It looked perfect. Richard and I still get together for coffee once a month. He's semi-retired now, but he always says that the Pinewood Heights case was one of his favorites. "Not often you get to win so decisively," he told me. "Usually, property disputes are complicated, lots of gray area. But this was black and white. They built on your land without asking. Couldn't be simpler." I saw Patricia one more time about 2 years after everything went down. I was having breakfast at the Crow Wing Cafe in town when she walked in with a man I didn't recognize. She looked different. Her hair was longer, natural color instead of that harsh blonde. She was dressed casually, not in the expensive athleisure she used to wear. Our eyes met across the restaurant. For a moment, I thought she might leave. But instead, she walked over to my table. "Frank," she said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure." She sat down across from me, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I've been in therapy, working through a lot of things, and my therapist suggested I make amends with people I've hurt. You're at the top of that list." I waited. "I was wrong," she said. "About everything. The HOA stuff, the lake, the way I treated you. I was so caught up in this idea of what the community should be that I stopped caring about what was right. I convinced myself that the end justified the means, that you were being selfish, that I was doing a good thing. But I was just taking something that wasn't mine, and I hurt a lot of people in the process." "Yeah," I said, "you did. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, and I'm sorry." She stood up to leave, but I stopped her. "Patricia, for what it's worth, I hope things work out for you." She smiled, a real smile, not the fake one she used to wear. "Thanks, Frank. I'm working on it." She went back to her table and I finished my breakfast. It felt like a final chapter closing on the whole saga. These days, life is quiet again. I fish on my lake in the summer, skate on it in the winter. The HOA hosts community events at the clubhouse they built on land they actually own, and sometimes I attend. Tom's wife makes excellent cookies. I never did find out what happened to Sharon and Deborah, Patricia's loyal followers. I assume they're still in Pinewood Heights somewhere, keeping their heads down. Morrison apparently moved to Minneapolis and started over at a new firm. The lesson, if there is one, is pretty simple. You can't just take things because you want them. You can't ignore property rights because you think you know better. And you definitely can't build a resort on someone's lake without asking. Every February 14th, on what would have been the resort's anniversary, I pour myself a glass of champagne and walk down to the lake. I stand on the ice, right where the building used to be, and I toast to property rights, good lawyers, and the importance of reading your deed carefully. Then I go home, light a fire, and enjoy the peace and quiet of my lakefront property. All of it. Every last inch.